Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Disappearances video. All right, let's go ahead and let's continue the wonderful book Vanished Mysterious Disappearances, written by David Clark. Now we're going to be starting on chapter 3. It looks like chapter 3 is going to be in 2 parts. Maybe even 3, I'm not quite sure yet. And the title or the theme of it has to do with crowds. So in other words, instead of one person disappearing within this chapter, or at least being the focus of within this chapter, instead it's going to be on a group of people. It could be a colony, it could be a small area like a small town, village, something along those lines, which is so bizarre because if it's one person disappearing, okay, that could happen. But the fact that a whole bunch of people all disappear at the same time, that's what makes it so mysterious. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start part 1. And the subtitle of it is called The Lost Colony. So here's what it says. Sir Walter Raleigh is a man with many claims to fame. Among his listed achievements are the introduction to Europe of both tobacco and the potato. Crowning all, of course, in the popular imagination is the occasion upon which he spread his cloak in the gutter for the benefit of Queen Elizabeth. The fact that there is no truth in any of it has not detracted from his reputation. Raleigh did demonstrate great skill in writing verse and has taken his place quite rightfully alongside Donne and Marvell as one of the greatest metaphysical poets of his day. His other great interests in life, overseas exploration, proved to be less of a success and led ultimately to his execution. Yet even in this sphere of activity, he has managed to acquire and retain more than his fair share of the credit. He preferred not to accompany the voyages of discovery which he organized, and viewed such ventures largely as a means of self-aggrandizement. Much of the early pioneer work of exploration on North America coastal waters was done by Raleigh's stepbrother, Humphrey Gilbert, who nurtured a genuine desire to see English settlers in the New World. With the Spanish preoccupied in exploiting the wealth of South America, the English had a free hand in tentative exploration further north. In 1583, Gilbert took possession of Newfoundland in Queen Elizabeth's name, although no attempt at a permanent settlement was made. On the homeward voyage, Gilbert's ship was lost in a storm, and it fell to Raleigh to continue his work. The difference was that while Gilbert had been primarily concerned with establishing settlements, Raleigh's major incentive, like that of the Spanish, lay in the discovery of gold. With the Spanish dominating the American coastline as far north as Florida, Raleigh had to concentrate his activities further up the seaboard, but well to the south of Newfoundland, which was infested by fog and hostile Indians. In March 1584, he successfully procured from Queen Elizabeth a patent granting him permission to explore such remote, heathen, and barbarous lands, countries, and territories not actually possessed of any Christian prince, nor inhabited by Christian people. 1/5 of all the treasures he found was to go to the crown. The expedition, unaccompanied by Raleigh himself, comprised of 2 ships, captained by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow. They left England in April 1584 and, negotiating the Atlantic via the Canary Islands, put into the haven about 125 miles up the coastline from Florida. Subsequent exploration showed that the land, which was fertile and abundant with game, was not the mainland after all, but a long island, Roanoke Island. They christened it Virginia. During their sojourn, they encountered a tribe of friendly Indians and cultivated the friendship of the chief, Guanganamico. Bearing glowing reports of this new land and of the welcome they had received, the members of the expedition arrived back in England in September. As a result of this encouraging news, a fleet of 7 ships under Sir Richard Grenville set sail the following spring. 100 men under the command of Ralph Lane were put ashore in Virginia with the object of establishing a colony there during the next 12 months. Lane and his companions discovered that not all of the Indians were friendly, the various tribes being constantly at war with one another. The colonists were also dependent upon the goodwill of the Indians for the provision of food. Granganamil was now dead, and his son, Pemisapon, reigning in his stead. Pemisapon was not quite as friendly as his father and did his best to destroy the embryonic settlement. During one of the fights which ensued, Pemisapon was killed. But the English were still in very poor repair, being unable to fend for themselves without the Indians' help. It was with great joy, therefore, that they greeted Sir Francis Drake and his fleet of 23 ships, Drake having taken time off from his piratical exploits in the West Indies in order to call on them. The condition of the men led Drake to agree to evacuate the colony. This proved difficult, however, for a savage storm left the fleet severely damaged. Drake did manage to put his ships to sea, but at the cost of leaving 15 colonists on land. Drake arrived in England with the remnants of the Virginian colonists in July 1586. Although the exercise had been a disaster, there was evidence that considerable deposits of copper were waiting to be exploited, with the added promise of rich pearl fishing among the inlets dotting the coastland. Accordingly, Raleigh sent out John White with 150 men the following year. Upon his arrival, White attempted to trace the 15 men who had been left behind the year before. The Indians, who seemed to have regained their friendly disposition, advised him that the Englishmen had been attacked by another hostile tribe which had killed some of their numbers, the survivors fleeing to a nearby island from which they had disappeared. On this somewhat discouraging note, White sailed for England, leaving another colony of 120 men and women and his own granddaughter, Christian Virginia, the first white child to be born in North America. White left for England in 1586 but was prevented from returning to Virginia the following year as planned. War with Spain was brewing, and there followed a government embargo on ships setting sail from British ports. In the spring of 1588, White did contrive to encourage two captains to break the embargo and set sail on a reprovisioning expedition, but they were compelled to go back to port after coming off worse in an encounter with a French vessel. Even after the destruction of the Armada, very little was done to get a relief expedition underway. The truth was that Raleigh was becoming disillusioned with the Virginian design. He had new fish to fry nearer home in Ireland, where it was possible to build up vast estates at much less risk. And so it was not until the spring of 1590 that White finally got underway again. Even then, the three captains commissioned for the task were more interested in privateering, preying in particular upon Spanish shipping. Eventually, Virginia was reached in the August of 1590. Upon landing on Roanoke Island, White found the settlement to be deserted. The primitive houses he had left in 1586 had been replaced by a palisade. He had agreed with the colonists that they were compelled to leave the settlement. They should carve the name of their destination on the trunk of a tree, and that if they were in any danger, a cross would be carved above them. On one of the corner posts of the palisade was carved the word Croatoan, a friendly Indian village 50 miles to the north. And so with relief, White noted that there was no cross carved above the name, but his relief was short-lived. The season was by now too far advanced to spend much time or permit much time to be spent in excursions along the coastline. A cursory search was made, but weather conditions took a turn for the worse, so all three ships turned tail and made for a friendlier coast. White was unable to find anyone else, least of all Raleigh, to finance a further expedition, and incredible as it may seem, the Virginians were left to their fate. And just what was their fate? The colonists had disappeared without a trace. There was no indication that there had been in any danger, although they must have been on the verge of starvation. What must their feelings have been when first one, then two, and then 3 years passed with no sign of relief? Their only hope of survival lay with the Indians. It is believed that the settlers divided into two groups, a small party remaining in Croatoan to await the return of white, while the main body moved further inland to the swamplands of present-day southern Virginia, where they lived for 20 years, intermingling with the Indians until they were almost wiped out by the warlike Powhatans. Certainly many legends concerning white tribes with English names have been handed down to us. That the disappearance of the colonists is mysterious cannot be denied, although it can be explained by other than supernatural reasons. The true horror of the story lies in the fact that civilized Europeans can be callously abandoned in the way that they were. It must be remembered, nonetheless, that the 16th century was an age in which death was a daily occurrence. Many critics pointed out that the settlers had been aware of the risks involved and had only themselves to blame. Others blamed the sea captains. The sea captains blamed the merchants blamed Raleigh, and Raleigh, rather unwisely, blamed the Queen. Like a present-day politician, Raleigh parred any awkward questions with the bland statement that Virginia remained an outpost which could, at any future time, be contacted with a view to development. Some people, such as Francis Bacon, were unimpressed, Bacon himself referring to the guiltless blood of many miserable persons. But the American continent was to exact a terrible revenge. Raleigh was assigned to the Tower of London on charges of treachery by the new king, James I, but in 1616 he was released on the understanding that he would lead an expedition to discover El Dorado. His son, who accompanied him, was killed on the Orinoco in a skirmish with Spaniards, and Raleigh returned home empty-handed. His last expedition in October 1618 was a short one to the scaffold. And then that's it. That concludes at least this part 1 of chapter 3, once again focusing on lost colonies, in this case, the famous Roanoke colony. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. That's a nice way, kind of like 4 pages almost, of summarizing everything associated with that mysterious circumstance. So the Roanoke colony has remained in history one of the most baffling mysteries to this very day. I've always wondered what entailed that information, and now we can see in 4 pages, again, it pretty much summed it up. It's the fact that you had a group of people that, through circumstances from their own handling and then circumstances outside of their control, they were basically left there, and it should have been the next year that they would have had a situation where somebody would come back to that land. But as it turns out, war with Spain was brewing. There was an embargo. It prevented ships from sailing from British ports, and so they were stuck. And so it went from 1 year to 2 years to 3 years to then finally 4 years. What should have been a jump from 1586 to 1587 instead became 1590. And then when that happened, that's when White was able to go back. And when he did so, he found that the colonists, the houses, everything there had been gone, all gone, replaced by something called the palisade. At least they had the wherewithal to have a carving, an indication that would only be an internal communication between themselves, showcasing what happened. And so it showed the name Croatoan, meaning the destination that they went to, and it did not have a cross on top of it, meaning they weren't in danger. So where were they? What happened? There was no indication that they were there in Croatoan, and there was no indication about what happened to them anywhere. And so because of that, they are still such a mystery in time when it comes to what occurred to that small colony. And I have no idea either. My best guess, just jumping to realistic conclusions, is they met a bad fate traveling to Croatoan. I don't think they ever even got there. I think something occurred. There was maybe a battle somewhere there involving some of the Native Americans, some of the warlike ones that were called the Powhatans maybe, and so they were outright killed right there, or they ended up not coming to that area because something else was causing them to go bad, like some disease or something happening to their food, and then they ended up starving. Something like that, like they ended up passing away due to the conditions of the environment. I think that's more along those lines, because if they would have mingled with the Indians, there would have been something found. Like there would have been, it would be hard for it to not stand out. If you had a group of Native Americans that are intermingling with new settlers, and all of a sudden you see like a white person there, that would stand out. There would be something there that would be communicated. But who knows? That still remains a very mysterious item to this day. All right, everyone, that pretty much wraps it for this go around. And then the next one will be another lost colony. Let me know what you guys think. All right, everyone, take care.